Hey y'all, welcome to the Along the Gravel Road podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea Barona. I'm really excited today to be talking to Coach K. She is a mental health coach, and I connected with her on a meetup that we had with the You Aren't Alone project, where we were facilitating conversations around the anxiety with voting. And we really started delving into her work and talking about grief and loss, which, you know, it's a topic that's very difficult to talk about, but it's something that touches us all in such unique ways, and it's different for everybody. And so I really wanted to bring her in, especially during the holidays, to talk about this tough conversation and then to share a little bit about her personal mental health journey with us.
Before we jump in, I do want to talk about an amazing production company that is producing this podcast, Ray Media Group. If you're looking for a company that can deliver an amazing product and an experience, then Ray Media Group is who you need to call. They specialize in weddings, podcasts, commercials, YouTube, business promotions, and it's really been great to work with a company who strives to create this experience for their clients. And so you're not just a number to them. They take the time to build these relationships. Trust me, I know from experience. We've been working together for a little bit now, and it's been amazing. And they put up with me, which is a great thing. So you can check out their website at raymediagroup.com. That's RHEA mediagroup.com, or give Ken a call at 225-772-7504.
Thank you so much for being here, Coach K.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, starting off, I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal mental health journey, and then we can kind of talk a little bit more about how that led to your professional life too.
Okay. I am Coach K with the Lotus Effect, and basically starting off for myself, I didn't know at the time that I was really dealing with loss and grief a whole bunch. So as a little girl, the first, I guess you can say, or dealing with loss or grief was from the stance of my mom, who was a drug addict. And so I was raised by my grandmother and my aunt, who really, of course, did their best, So a lot of abandonment issues and dealing with that, I believe, really led me to start my own self-improvement journey from a very young age. And then throughout life, just dealing with the loss of my grandmother, who I was a caregiver for. Also dealing with the loss of my sister, which was the most recent one, was like 2 years ago, my younger sister. And that was one that was just kind of like all of a sudden. Also dealing with the loss of what most may say, like divorce, miscarriages. So I had a lot of, loss. And so not realizing and giving myself what I needed to actually grieve, because I always say death is an equalizer. It doesn't matter how much you make, what you do for a living, and it doesn't matter, and it brings you to a certain playing field. So that is kind of where I started. And I always say that grief chose me. So.
And for you, how did you get through some of that grief and loss yourself? What did that look like for you getting support?
So from the beginning, I think that I had to learn my pattern, right? So it was kind of like I was dealing with these certain things, but I would just get really busy. Okay, if I get busy, then I won't have to worry about it. If I get busy, I can ignore it and just kind of, And I think I really broke down after the loss of my grandmother, and that was right also after the miscarriages. And so I had went back to work, and I was, just doing my normal thing, just really being busy. And it was like at one point after the funeral, after all the family drama, after all of that stuff, it was like it got quiet. Yeah. And then when it got quiet, it got dark. And it was kind of like, okay, I really need to figure out what I have to do. And so I started going to therapy. And learning and really starting to become aware of what was working for me and what's not working for me. And I had always been the type that would try to find the silver lining. And at some point when you go too deep in the hole, you can't even think about a silver lining, So I realized I started pulling on my resources, and I really started doing my work. And that is really when I realized, oh my gosh, this really is something when people start calling me and asking me, and wanting to say, let's have a conversation. I'm here at this place and I'm so low, and what can I do? And what does grief look like? And why do I feel like this? And, I already cried about it. Why am I still crying about it?
Yeah.
So it kind of just started developing from that place.
Okay. So you started, as you were doing the work, people were noticing that you had been through all these things and you were starting to heal from it. And so people started reaching out to you for support. So what came next for you in your professional journey of like making this a career?
Once I realized that I wanted to extend past the simple fact of family and friends or people that were really close to me, because I realized the best way to honor my past and to honor my loved ones was actually through others. And so that was also a part of my healing journey, right? So, and it's never ending, So once I realized like, oh my God, this is what feeds my soul. This is what keeps going. This is the thing that I don't have to make a penny. I could wake up in the middle of the night and I have a phone call and it's like, I have to do this, like that's when I realized like, oh my God, this is it, and so I went to get my certification in coaching through the CCAP program, and also learning anything I could about how to actually coach someone on or through, grief or self-improvement, because I do both.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that. I think I had kind of a similar journey. Is like the moment that I realized that this thing that I had been through personally and had made such a difference in my life of like the really getting help for my mental health led me to then exploring like, how can I make a career out of this? Because it's just like, this is what I'm meant to do.
Yes.
And it feels so amazing to like sort of find that intersection and be able to bring all of that together. So congratulations.
Yes, it's such a blessing, right? It's like a purpose.
And it's so exciting. And that comes through. I mean, the moment I spoke to you, I was like, I want you to be able to share your story, with our audience because of the topic, obviously,
right.
But also because I could see like just how how important and impactful this has been for you personally, and how that bleeds into everything you're doing, and the passion behind it was really evident the moment that I met you. So I was really excited to be able to talk to you and give you kind of a space to be able to talk about it. So jumping back a little bit, we've talked a little bit about therapy in here. We've talked about people's experience in different support systems and different things like that. Coaching is not something that we've really touched on. So that was another reason I was excited to talk to you. Awesome. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the differences between therapy and coaching, or the similarities, and what you've experienced thus far?
So the way I like to describe it is almost if you had a spectrum, right? And it was from 1 to 10. And let's say, 1 was sick, can't get out of bed, I need a diagnosis, I need medication. That's almost therapy. Like, that's therapy. You need someone to definitely take you from not being able to function. Let's say 5 is healthy, just for the example, and then 10 is thriving. So there is definitely some overlap, right? Coaching is focused on where you are right now to where you're going. We may talk a little bit about your past. It may come up a little bit, but it's more on forward moving. Now, there are certain, like, just from being human, things that are going to come up, right? And then there's some things like maybe at a 3, if you were on that spectrum, that was like anxiety or, a little depression or, certain just human things that we all go through, that would say, okay, I'm still working with a therapist, but a coach can also help move me forward. We're almost like, the extra, the whipped cream on top in a sense to get you, keep moving forward. We're an additional resource to therapy. Basically, for a coach. And you can do both at the same time, which is probably ideal. But let's say you were in that 7, 8 range. Could you still benefit from a therapist? Of course. But could you also benefit from coaching to get you to thriving and living, someone holding you accountable, someone who is there to study your patterns and say, okay, well, this is what you said last time. This is what you did, or why didn't that work for you? And ask those thought-provoking questions to get you to where you need to go, to get to that 10.
Yeah, very cool. No, I like that a lot, and I like that explanation. And I think you're exactly right. A lot of us can benefit from both, or in any point of our lives, one or the other may be more helpful. But I think especially right now, as we're experiencing this really shortage in mental health professionals, and what help looks like, and people having to wait a lot longer to get any kind of support. At this point, it's like, what can we do? How can we just find all of these tools in our toolkit to be able to thrive, and not just survive and get through the day? And I think that's exactly sort of where this fits in sort of your toolkit. And I really love that. I love, the work that you're doing.
Because, and also with coaching, usually your coach is a little bit quicker to access most of the time.
Yeah.
Also, of course, from a coach standpoint, we can't diagnose. We're not giving medication, so that's a big difference. And also just from meeting and having that conversation and saying, okay, I think you can benefit more from therapy and getting you to a certain place, and realizing that you are the one doing the work. You're the person that's really truly doing the work.
Yes.
I'm here just to support.
Yep.
So it's beautiful when you find your resources and your tools, and you're able to be open and ready to use them, because everybody is not in a coachable state.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And to be able to, if somebody comes to you, to be able to recognize that, and to be able to maybe refer them to a different level of care if a coach, coaching situation is not the place for them right now, is also really important. So I like that a lot. And I like that we're sort of opening up, the idea of the podcast to open me up people to all the different types of support that's out there, to be able to recognize these things. So if someone were to come to you, what are some of the tools and tips or things that you're working with your clients on, or do you call them clients?
I do.
Okay. Just checking. That you're working with them on, what would be, you mentioned grief and you mentioned self-improvement. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, whether it be a session or just more overall general?
Right. So usually, first we'll kind of do a meet and greet and get to know each other and see, because also I may not be the coach for you, right? So we want to do a meet and greet and kind of get a feel for it and see if you're in a good place. And if I fit for you. So that would kind of be the start. And then once we get into, we'll have goals set, right? So coming in intake, just like any other situation or session, you'll have an intake, and we can do face-to-face, we can do Zoom, whatever your preference is. One of the main goals is to, like I say, survey where you are at the moment, and then moving from that. So if you have a goal to learn how to set boundaries, then we would kind of okay, well, let's go through, a time where you set a boundary and you didn't hold it, or what does a boundary mean to you and what does that look like? Other tools may be taking a character strength test or survey to see okay, now how can I get you to this goal? Well, I know that one of your strengths is spirituality. So I know if something is connected spiritually for you, you're more likely to, reach that goal. Yeah. Or if I'm listening to you and I hear, oh, I hate my job, I hate these people who I work with, let me figure out, is it really the job or is it the freedom, that you're really looking for? And so really just from the stance, because it's so individualized, going from there. From a grief aspect, depending on where you are, really first holding just a safe space for you, right? Just holding hope until you are ready to pick it up again is really where I come in at. And so I'm okay, well, how can we take the broken pieces and move it towards a place where you feel okay, I can breathe again. I can pick up this hope and move forward. How can I honor my past? How can I honor that loss? Because grief is so many different ways and forms that we don't realize it, right? Anything that you have ever loved or dreamed of, you can grieve. And so a lot of the times we're I don't know why I feel like this, or I don't know why. And it's because you lost something. You lost that dream that you had about that relationship. When they told you that, it's a chance that now, this medical issue could affect the way you live. That's grieving, And so I meet you where you are, and I have the conversation with you to kind of figure out okay, you lost your mother or you lost your grandmother. What ways could we honor her? You know, is that just cooking a meal that reminds you of her? Is that putting a picture up? Is that having a celebration every birthday? You know, ways that you can still, because the other thing is like, you never want to feel like that's the end. It's so final. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I have two things. Well, so there's so much more that we can talk about in the grieving process, and I do want to get into a little. I definitely want to dig into more of grief and loss, and sort of maybe some tangibles that maybe can help people, especially. But first, I also want to say something really important that you brought up that is in coaching and therapy and all these things in this idea of getting support is being an active participant in it.
Oh, for sure.
Is so important. And I think, you know, some people may look at it as like just sort of being passive and not really being, you know, putting in the work, but it takes so much work. And so
much work.
And especially in, you know, in what you're talking about, you have to be active in not just setting these goals. And obviously you're a support system in that. But at the end of the day, you know, whoever it is, you're going into it needing to take a part in it. It's up to you. So I think that's an important part of the process too.
Yes, that's a huge part of it, right? Because if every time we meet and we talk and it's kind of like, yeah, I still didn't do it. Yeah, I don't get it. I still don't, you know, it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to, maybe coaching is not where you are. So a lot of an ideal person would be more of like, I know I need to do this. I just don't know how.
Hey y'all, Brandon Barker here with Barker Property Management and Commercial Real Estate. We use our knowledge and experience to offer a comprehensive plan and provide property management and commercial brokerage services across Louisiana. Our business was founded on the value of being responsive to our customers and protecting our clients' assets. We proudly support the You on a Loan project and the Along the Gravel Road podcast.
I just can't, you know, it's like I have this mental block. I keep going through the same patterns. Like, how can I maneuver around this? Or how can I look at it differently? What do I need to do? Where are my resources? Yes. That's the person that's ready for coaching.
Yes.
You know, so yes. And the whole thing is to also maybe break down those goals into something smaller. Where it's like, okay, I achieved this. Now I'm building confidence. Now I'm growing, you know? So, and that is just, that's the beauty.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like you know, sometimes it's, oh, I'm just not ready to tackle this goal. And other times this is an overwhelming goal. How do we break it down? Right. And being able to work with a person to do that is so important.
Yes.
And can be helpful for anybody in your life. Okay, so now let's jump into sort of the grief and loss, because you said something that is also like really resonates, I think, with a lot of people. Okay. This idea of loss of other things that's not just this, you know, this death of like losing somebody.
Loved one, right?
Yes, and that's harder for most of us because we think, oh, I should be able to deal with this, or we're trying to just rush past these losses that have impacted us so much without even just you said hold space, and it's like hold space for all of those things. Correct. And to be able to tell somebody that this was a loss and it's okay to take a second to experience that. And there's nothing like wrong with you for feeling all of these things about this, even though maybe all the external things are telling you should be able to move on.
Right.
You know, and I think that's such a big part. Can you talk more about maybe what that looks like as you work with people on that, or what, you know, your experience personally has been with some of that? So
for sure, I can recall for myself, for instance, dealing with a divorce. Well, with my divorce, I can recall kind of saying, okay, I'm calling this quits. This has to end right now for me. And I think that from the outside looking in, people wanted you to be really angry one way, right? Like it was like, oh, well, you still being nice to him, or, oh, you still having this conversation, or, oh, you know, he moved on. Why do you have feelings? Because, you know, and it's like a lot of the times when we divorce something, it's not because we don't love it.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't take away the feelings and the emotions. So in that aspect, it was very important for me to be true and to be honest with myself. and holding space for two emotions, right? Because I can be angry and upset, but I can also feel hurt, or I can also still love this person and remember the good things that was there and what was planted. So basically I'm almost like a permission giver.
Yes.
Like,
and that permission is so important. There's so many times where, and for most people, yes, it would be great if we could give ourselves permission, but we can't always do that, especially when you're in it so deeply.
Right. So that was for that, for sure. And then with also even thinking back with the miscarriage, it was kind of like I wasn't supposed to have, I guess, moments because, well, I didn't actually have a stillborn, but I had these two miscarriages. At one point I was 3 months, at the other point I was 5 months, but it was almost like because there wasn't a funeral, or there wasn't a loss in a sense of, this big ordeal, that I was just supposed to move on because there was no baby there, right? Just pack up whatever little box you had and, put that away. But it was so personal. And so everybody else is moving on, right? Like, oh, okay, you're invited to the next baby shower, or you're invited to whatever, part of their life that they're moving on to. And they just assume that, oh, you should move forward. And I don't think I realized that I had the right to.
Yeah.
And so for myself and even for other clients, what I realized is that in talking to them, it's almost like because everybody around them is saying or giving off, and they don't mean to, right? Yeah. Because they're uncomfortable sitting with their own emotions. So I definitely don't want to sit with yours. Like, okay, should I hug you? Should we write a letter? Should we just I'll call you later? So it's not personal for sure.
Right.
But having that time for myself and giving other people that, because I don't mind sitting with you, right? It doesn't bother me to see your tears. I know that's a cleansing process for you, So with that, I really kind of forced, in a sense, the people around me also to okay, she's having a moment, or okay, allow her to have this. And so that was pretty big for me, because I was used to just moving, keep going. And it doesn't go away.
No. And instead it shows up in places and spaces where it's not ideal. And if you're not doing the work in a place that, purposely doing it,
correct,
it's going to show up somewhere.
Right.
You can't just avoid that forever.
Right. And I'm so when I think about all of the tools and all that I have, I just look back and I'm like, how the hell was I making? How was I doing this?
Yeah.
How was I doing this?
Yes. And I think I'm sure a lot of people feel exactly that way. And I think a lot of people are especially if you've sort of gone through all these things and then you're just now addressing it or getting support for it. Yeah. You got to now go back and revisit all the moments and areas of loss or whatever it was and heal from there. And so it can be a long process, and it can be a painful one, but it's also a beautiful process. And once you have those tools, you can look back and then name the things and move forward and know that you can do it, from then that point on.
Right. That was the real reason too why I went with the Lotus Effect, just because the whole idea of the whole process of that flower coming from that dark, murky water place and then blossoming into something so beautiful, and allowing the sun to just hit you and bask in that, it was when I learned about that process, it was like, oh my God, that is so life.
That's it. Yeah. I love that. That's beautiful. When it comes to loss and grief, and we're talking a lot about sort of the external, being the person who's trying to be there for somebody, that's a difficult space to be in. But I think, I don't think any of us are going to do it right or going to navigate that right. But there's also a lot, I know for me personally, sort of the losses I've experienced, it always, for me, I kind of put my own feelings on the back burner, because it was like somebody lost more than I did in this situation. And so I think we're always sort of trying to navigate how our grief and loss compares to other people. What is that like? I mean, it's different for everybody, but
so I was listening actually to something the other day, and they were talking about comparison suffering. And how even with like social media, right, getting on there and comparing yourself and just like basically causing yourself more suffering in a sense.
It does.
And there's not a scale to say that my loss is worse than your loss. You know, we do a lot of that comparing, but heartbreak is heartbreak. Pain is pain, you know? And so it really is you. And that's why I said it's so individualized, but pain, it's your pain, and you have the right to witness that pain. You have the right to say that you're in pain. You know, it's one of the things that I hate about people, I guess, when it comes to grief, because you need to know that you matter. You matter.
And it is such a tough thing, but I think that's the reason why it's okay to reach out for help outside of, you know, the loss, outside of the people around you, and to use somebody like a coach or like a therapist to get through it, because that's the space where you're going to be able to actually like process it on your own without comparing it. Because, you know, if you're in it, so deep in it, and the people around you, you're going to do that naturally. That's how we're built. So that's why getting help and getting outside perspective and really getting that space, having your own space is so important. And it's so great, like with the work that you're doing. So we're getting into the holidays. Grief, loss, all of these things it's intensified. It's magnified during this time. What would you say to somebody who's struggling, especially right now?
The holiday season definitely, like you said, intensifies the whole situation. I mean, people are separated from COVID. We lost a lot of people during that time also. But we also lost traditions, you know, things and that we used to do and how we used to do it. First of all, I would say for sure, if you don't even like the word grief or grieving in that sense, but you can just really process your emotions, right? And taking that time to really sit there and reaching out to someone is very important. If you don't have, you know, per se, a therapist, if you don't have a coach, if you don't have that, there's also tools and resources online, right? There's communities for people who have lost their mother, people who can't be in contact with their family members. So being able to really process that is probably one of the first things I would say. Allow yourself to process it. I would also say you don't have to it doesn't have to look like the normal tradition, right? It doesn't have to look like, oh, my family's all around the table and we're all smiling and laughing. If you have experienced, you know, loss, or you or that loved one for you won't be there, you know, come up with your own plan. Have a plan. If it's, oh, Chelsea, I can only stay for an hour because I need to go home and process this, you know, or have a plan to say, I'm going to pop a piece in the oven and I'm going to watch my favorite movie because that's how I need to spend my holiday. Just know that you have options, and it doesn't have to be suffering through something that you do not want to be a part of, or suffering through what looks like something's supposed to be. You know, if you know that you cannot handle Facebook and Instagram with all of the pajamas and family photos, then don't, you know, like, it's not required of you. And this is one day. This is one day. Tomorrow, you get to start over all brand new. You don't have to go through that. You don't have to feel like that, you know, but really giving yourself that space. And then changing up traditions if you want to. And creating your own tradition is also a beautiful thing, you know? And then, like I said, and don't do comparison suffering.
Number one.
And then, like, just don't put yourself in situations where you have already been let down and trying to make something that is not working for you. You know?
Yeah, that's important. And it's, again, we're going back to, like, giving yourself permission to do all these things too, you know, saying, like, it just because we've always done this, it looks different now. Let's change it.
And don't judge yourself.
And don't judge yourself for it. Yeah.
Don't judge yourself. Like, allow what comes up. Allow because remember that you can hold two different emotions. And I think we don't allow ourselves to do that, you know, and that's the biggest part.
Yeah, that conversation has come up in so many different ways in the last few weeks for me, is that and. It's not a but, it's an and both things can be true. And especially when it comes to emotions, especially when it comes to these very confusing things that we're dealing with, that nobody can do it exactly right. And so that means that no way is the right way to go through this. Right. And so that and is okay. And sitting with that, all the feelings.
And I think because with grief, we want that 1 through 5, right? We want it. we want to get the, okay, I was in denial. All right. Now I'm ready to, you know, I'm angry. I'm ready to bargain. I'm ready. Like, we're ready to go through it and say we're done with it. But that's not how it works. You may loop back around to denial. You know, you may, and it may be 2 or 3 years later, but that's the point of allowing that to happen for you, because there is no, okay, let me check the box and I've done that. You know, it's like, I still may see a baby right now and say, oh man, you know, but I'll allow myself to have that emotion rather than, you know, I mean, maybe your coping thing is, I don't know, Coca-Cola's, I don't know, shop it, whatever it is, you know, but just like, okay, I allow myself. And it's not a right or wrong, and it's not about how long. And I think that is
the time. Yeah. The time frame is I think big for a lot of people. And just like you said, the steps aren't 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not linear steps. Yes. Right. And it can, and that can feel, I mean, that's hard to accept that's not, because it would be great if we could just check a box and walk through those steps
would it
and
be?
Get past it, you know, and it's just not the reality.
Right.
And so I think do you work with the steps and helping people sort of understand them, or how do the steps work in your process?
So with, I keep thinking about this certain client, but a lot of it is people like to put labels.
Yes.
So if I'm talking with you and I'm, you know, asking certain questions, I may necessarily like, okay, in my mind, I know that right now they are, you know, bargaining, you know, depending on, because remember, it's individualized. Yep. Depending on that person and where they are, I may say, okay, well, we truly know that you can't swap this out, right? Like, this is not a you buy, I share, you know, whatever. And then we may talk through that. Or a lot of the times I hear my clients say, oh my God, yes, that's the feeling. Like, I couldn't put it together. I couldn't put that word together, or I couldn't articulate what I needed. And it's like, oh, but that is the feeling. That's the emotion. That's where I am right now.
Yeah.
You know, and I think for my grieving clients, that has been probably the most rewarding, of being seen. And like I said, witnessing that grief with them.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I think, like I said, this is such we all go through this. We all face grief and loss in so many different ways, some that we don't identify that way, but that we should. And yet it is still incredibly difficult, not just to go through, but to talk about and to accept and to give ourselves permission to feel, and all of these things.
Right.
And so just bringing more, you know, awareness around conversations around grief and loss, I think, is really important. And the work that you're doing is so important in that, and in self-improvement, and how they work together, I'm sure.
For sure.
Yes, again, we're all going through this. So it's part of this process of just becoming our best selves.
Yeah. And a lot of them don't realize, so they avoid coming for grief. They'll come for self-improvement. And then it's like, you're grieving this situation. I hope you realize that.
It's the thing we're putting to the side and trying to just do all this. Maybe we're focusing on these other things, but it's still there.
Yeah,
and it's just walking with us.
And I think that one of my next goals for myself is really studying different cultures and how they handle loss and grief, because I think for us, it's such an end, right? It's just like the end, and, you know, no more. And so I really want to get into that, just to bring a different perspective for clients and for people to realize that a lot of it is what we've learned and how we've all experienced it, right? Like, okay, you have, you know, and it's so quick.
Yeah.
Right? Like you lose them one day, and then the next day we're talking about funeral plans, and then we have the funeral, and then everybody else has moved on, and that's just supposed to be the end. Like that's and we take the loss or the death and we make that their life story when that is not the person or the thing that you lost. It wasn't just about, the car accident. It wasn't about, the illness. It wasn't about just that. It's so much more. That was their life. And I think we have to really just learn that whole, like the whole story and really like change the perspective and the narrative around grief and loss to really grow in that sense.
Yes. And I want to have you back on after you do explore that, because I think that's such an important topic. And you're so right. This is something that, especially as like a culture here, that we've been taught a lot of these things around death and grieving and loss, that it doesn't look the same for other people. And that can be unlearning that and relearning that. And reframing it and looking at it differently can be, it would be a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to have you back for that.
Awesome.
Okay. As we wrap up here in like the last 5 minutes or so, what would be one thing that you would want people to take away from this conversation that we had today?
That you don't have to go through it alone, and that pull resources, and that you have the right to be heard and seen as for sure as you have breath in your body.
Yeah.
That will probably be my main thing, to just let them know that I see you.
I love that. Thank you so much for talking with me today. We'll share your website and everything in the show notes on the website.
Awesome.
And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me.